Good evening, I'm Stephen Cummings and welcome again to the Citizens Community Forum. Our discussion continues where the objective is always to have an engaging, interactive and civil discourse, and in so doing help develop a culture of peace and understanding through constructive dialogue and, yes, citizens' participation. Our guests are those who express views and opinions of their own views which are not necessarily that of the FBN network, the Citizens Community Forum or that of the host. While many of us have been monitoring for almost a year and a half the impact of the global pandemic on Trinidad and Tobago, some economists will tell you that labor and employment continue to be among the biggest casualties today in the global economy, including Trinidad and Tobago. And in a time when there is not only a pandemic, but a time when there continues to be decreasing levels of production, scarcity, when we talk about scarce resources, and also high demand for goods and services. Recently, there have also been a number of developments directly impacting state enterprises and the SMEs in Trinidad and Tobago, small and medium enterprise developments or sectors or businesses, whichever way you would want to describe them, and their relationship with the labor market in Trinidad and Tobago. And I was looking at a report from the Central Bank. The Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago has also described what it calls the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused considerable market shocks throughout 2020 and to a certain extent going into 2021. And when we talk about market shocks, we are talking about the amount of dislocation that can be experienced in such an environment. Simply put, the central bank is also talking about quantity of labor that could have been employed productively instead of remaining idle. And for the technocrats as well as the uninitiated, researchers use several direct proxy measures of labor market slack, a technical term which is used by the central bank and financiers on the macroeconomic data. Suppressed real wage levels and decreased numbers of advertised job vacancies or a decreasing ratio of vacancies to unemployed persons are examples of different proxy measures that are used to better understand just how good or how bad the labor market is performing or responding to prevailing economic trends. Well, we started a discussion on labor's response to the pandemic in Trinidad and Tobago. And I thought it was important to continue that discussion at this time. And I have with me Mr. Joseph Remy from FITUN, Federation of Independent Trade Unions. And I know Mr. Remy holds so many other titles, but we would just stick with that one for now. Mr. Remy, good evening to you and welcome.
Thanks much, Stephen. It was a pleasure. And I had a little challenge with the audio, the piece I was using, so my apologies.
All right, it's all part of the course, Mr. Remy.
Technology.
Yes, it runs ahead, of us ever so often. Yes,
that's right.
We were talking about. I started out the program, Mr. Remy, talking about the impact of the COVID-19, and then the global pandemic, as a whole, on Trinidad and Tobago, and. Before I go further, we just want to indicate to our listeners and our viewers that we do expect Mr. Trevor Johnson to join us a little later on in the program from the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union. So we will, hopefully he would be able to join us a little later on. But just to start off the discussion, Mr. Remy, the impact on labor and the labor market in Trinidad and Tobago, I believe that the data is still coming in. We don't have a full impact on, we don't have an idea as to the full impact of what, the global pandemic has done, and specifically in the Trinidad and Tobago context, because we live here. Have you been able to get any sense as to where we are? We are what, a year and almost 6 months on in the middle of a pandemic?
As is usual, is the lack of valid data that will allow you to make proper analyses and allow us to have opportunity to come up with solutions, because in the absence of valid data, then most of your projections are going to be skewed. And that is a major challenge we are having.
Yes.
Where we sit, we have to take it based on the ground reports coming into us. And it has demonstrated, it has shown, displayed, that there are thousands of workers who have been displaced, and the displacement takes different forms. The most severe is those who have lost their jobs. Some have lost their jobs through retrenchment. Some have lost their jobs through the businesses that they belong to closing down. Some have lost their jobs through attrition. So we have those issues. And then we have those persons who continue to work, but they are working at reduced wages, and vastly reduced wages too, because of the scheduling that has to be done. And particularly in the services sector, we are seeing a lot of those persons who are not being employed. And then we have those who are on temporary layoff.
Yes.
And that temporary layoff is quite long. So the dynamics in the labor market is different now. And it is unique because in most cases, we never had all those different aspects convoluting at the same time, you know, to give you one toxic mix, I would want to call it, a very toxic mix in the labor market that is creating real havoc in the environment. And what we are seeing is that people are crying out for help. Even those who are working, they are crying out for help because they are working on much reduced wages and there is no control on the prices. So prices, foodstuff has gone up because of the supply chain challenges that we are having globally. So you're finding now shipping costs has risen.
Yes.
And that has an impact on prices. But those prices are thrown down to the consumer. And it is thrown down to a consumer in a very depressed state, in a market, in a labor market that it is really carrying them downwards, spiraling downwards, instead of any level of stability. And we have been crying out because we believe that the rigid state of emergency, yes, 3 months would have been necessary at the first instance. But once you continue it into another 3 months, you're talking half of your year, you know, you're going to be locked down and economic activity would be stymied. And that is a very much dangerous situation for those persons. And it is a frightening scenario that we are seeing. And that is why we were saying, we believe that there should be an ease up of the restrictions in terms of the state of emergency.
Yes.
Because yes, we have to learn to live with COVID. We have to make sure we have the policing of our regulatory measures, but let people get a chance to breathe and breathe economically. That's what I'm saying. And I think that is the major concern we are having from the trade union movement at this time.
All right, we're going to delve a little further, Mr. Remy, into that area of the extension of a state of emergency a little later on, and how that has, you know, been impacting and will and continues to impact on labor, on the labor market. But I wanted to address a very important. Now, the labor movement has been very much involved in negotiations and discussions, and I know that that there was an initiative some time ago which was launched, which was, you know, the labor movement very much involved in talking with the business chambers, trying to get that dialogue going. And I think that you were one of the persons who have been championing that cause, that listen, we should have a sort of a liaison, we should have discussion, we should be able to have some sort of a meeting over the table, you know, so that we don't have the kind of antagonistic, you know, dislocation in terms of, you know, workers against employer. How has that discussion, how is that discussion going?
Stephen, we started with the chambers. And we sense inside of there was a little bit of hesitance on the part of the chambers. We started off very promising, and we have not had a meeting since then, because that meeting was facilitated by the director of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, Dr. Andrew Vincent Henry,
yes,
who has experience in management and labor collaboration through the Promalco initiative that was done some years ago. And what happened is that because we were trying to reach to a point where we, in the absence of a national dictate for mandatory vaccine, our approach was that we should have site-specific vaccination programs, policies that will speak to the issue of health and safety and what are the requirements on specific sites. We were totally against an overall mandate for mandatory vaccine in the absence of any law that mandates mandatory vaccine in the country.
Yes.
But we were willing to discuss specific industry and specific sites that may have specific requirements. What kind of health and safety practices should be put in place there to ensure that there is business continuity? Because I think our aim was to have business continuity.
Yes.
But we have not had any further discussion with the chamber. We had a very fruitful discussion with the ECA, and we are anticipating to have another round of discussion with them very soon, because what we did is we put forward a framework for a risk-based approach for dealing with the health and safety issues in a pandemic.
Yes.
And they were very amenable to that particular approach, and they have indicated that they are prepared to continue the discussion along those lines. So we believe once we could get a foot in the employer class, that we could engage in those discussions, then the issue of business continuity, which now will lead to employment levels increasing, which will now address the challenges in the labor market and will address the social fallout. So it has a domino effect in a positive direction. Okay. And those are the kind of discussions we will want to continue to engage in. So we are looking forward to our next round of talks with the ECA, hopefully before the end of this week.
Right. So you're hopeful that there will be some, meaningful dialogue and discussion, and hopefully coming to a point where we can see some real positivity coming out of the discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be hard discussion, Stephen, because none of us would have had the experience of addressing these issues in a pandemic. Yeah. It's uncharted waters for all of us.
Indeed.
And then we have to find the mechanism to make sure whatever we do, remember, we are now setting a new platform.
Yes.
We are going to be setting a precedent, and we have to make sure that whatever we do is foolproof, or at least it could stand the test of time and could be laid as a foundation for future generations to use in the event they have to go through a situation like this again. So we have to make sure we get it, if not right, as close to right as possible. And that is why we don't believe this should be a rushed situation, and it should engage. We should engage, and that is why we said to the employers, engage your respective trade unions on the job site. And in the absence of a trade union, engage the workers and seek them, advise them to have some labor relations consultant, sit with them to give them proper industrial relations guidance and advice in this process, because this is a very challenging period for everyone.
And as you said, a very unique, environment that we have all,
very much so,
found ourselves in. But I have some information, Mr. Remy, which was posted by the central bank, and it dealt with the labor market, and it talks about some of the issues there. The latest official labor market statistics are available up to, based on what the central bank is saying, up to 2019. So you see that we are still at least a year.
We're behind. That's right.
But what it says here is that during the first quarter of 2019, the unemployment rate edged up to some 4.0% compared to 3.8% during the similar quarter of 2018. And meanwhile, it continues, the labor force participation rate fell slightly to 58.0% during the first quarter of 2019 compared to 58.9% during the corresponding period in 2018. So that what I'm seeing here is that we have been, there have been some kind of impact when we talk about the labor participation rate in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, Stephen, and there would have been, prior to the pandemic, we had those challenges, if you could recall, and we had the global economic meltdown. Then we had the situation with the petrochem, and we are still trying to measure the impact, the true impact of that petrochem shutdown. And on the heels of that, we had to deal with a pandemic.
Yes.
And then we had a major displacement at TSTT, and we had major retrenchment in other areas. So the central bank had their data correct in 2019 because the petrochem situation came to light 2017, 2018. It really blew out of proportion, right? And in 2019 is when the market started to feel the impact.
Yes.
And then while you were trying to address those labor market situations, You had the pandemic now that came and exacerbated everything.
Yes.
So it was spiraled downwards. And what we don't have now is data, because the thing is so disorganized and disjointed. And this is one of the areas I would want to fault the Ministry of Labor, because they have fell down on the job woefully. You know, I imagine in a pandemic where the labor market challenges and shocks have been so debilitating, you hardly hear our Minister of Labor making a productive and progressive pronouncement to give anyone any confidence that there is some level of policy and strategy that is being developed to address these situations. And that is a major concern to us. And the central bank data, although it is outdated, it is pointing in a direction that we believe is still consistent with what is happening now.
Yes. Mr. Remy, you mentioned the Minister of Labor. Let me pick you up on that point further. There was a comment that was made by the minister some time ago, when I think that it was the time when the labor movement moved away from from the negotiating table. We all know that history with NTAC and what NTAC was supposed to have been. And let's just get a listen to Minister Klachi at a previous interview that we had with him, and I'll have you respond thereafter.
We have unemployment rates soaring in every country. Trinidad is no exception to that. So, but moving away and getting the only thing you get into when you move away from the table of discussion is adversarial kinds of behavior and positioning. And I don't think that going in that direction at this time is to anybody's benefit. We don't need to mash up the place. We need to build. And the only way we build is through dialogue. The unions and labor has commented, and the views have been accepted for both the Industrial Relations Act and the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act. They have also been involved in the Cipriani College of Labor Act. In fact, we finalized on some of the issues that will be sent into cabinet. So it's not true to say that the union has not been involved in the discussion. It may be true that the legislation has not come as quickly as one would have liked. I feel that, notwithstanding, they may feel aggrieved at this point in time, that they understand national versus personal. I really think that they understand that they need to be at the table. I have no fear, no doubt in saying that they understand that. They may not be happy at the moment, and we need to address their concern. That is also critical.
Labour Minister Stephen Klachi there. Mr. Remy, the minister, of course, would have had to react to what Labour was in terms of the scenario and the situation at that moment in time. But is that a statement that rests with you? Are you comfortable with that response? Do you think that the minister would have treated and would have responded to the issues of the day?
It is the most inappropriate response, Stephen. I want to be brutally frank. The minister never addressed the fundamental concerns that would have been raised. And we were never there at the table for confrontation. We were always there for consultation, but we were there for meaningful consultation. There's a fundamental difference between consultation for sham purposes and consultation that is meaningful. And what you found happening is that we were there, and a lot of national issues that were impacting on workers, they were taking decisions outside of the realm of NTAC. And after the fact, then bringing it to NTAC's attention. Petrochin keeps in point.
Unilaterally? Yeah.
That's right. Unilaterally, WASA, TDC, the non-payment of Port Authority wages, they were taking decisions, and these things were not being addressed at NTAC. And we were saying, while we sit there with government and business and the employer class, trying to work out protocols for a meaningful and harmonious working relationship, the government as the major employer was taking unilateral decisions. To us, it was really against the good principles of industrial relations practices. It was like a slap in the face of labor. I have you sitting here with me while I'm taking these actions, you know, and I always recall what happened with the Tourism Development Corporation.
Yes.
And the fact that there was a call a morning and the company was shut down the same day. And it's the same approach that the government is taking. And all we are saying is that if you want us to be engaged, the engagement has to be meaningful, purposeful, and it must have trust embedded in the DNA of the discourse. What we don't want is to engage in discussion for you to go and publicly say, for political aggrandizement, that we have engaged labor. But while we engage labor, we are busting workers short underneath. And we could never sit down and be comfortable in those circumstances. And the minister needs to understand that labor is there to support, but we're not going to be there for party show purposes.
All right. And you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. With me, Mr. Joseph Remy, and representing the Federation of Independent Trade Unions. Mr. Remy is a specialist, labor relations issues, industrial relations issues, and we're happy to have him sit with us this evening inside the Citizens Community Forum. Our topic, a response from labor in a pandemic. Of course, it's a continuation of an earlier discussion that that we began. So we continue the discussion. Mr. Remy, when we look at Trinidad and Tobago and in the global context, and do you believe that, and again, referencing our laws, I know that, you know, for so many years and decades, and we've been talking about the modernization of our industrial relations laws and our labor laws, and we have had several incarnations of even members from the very same trade union movement have walked the corridors of power, you know, promising to bring change within but that has the labor is still is still somewhere in you know, haven't not been able, you know, to get to that point. You know, where are we in terms of, you know, our laws and even those who would have you know, promised to bring about that change which labor's been calling for?
And Stephen, that is a major disappointment of the labor movement. We battled strongly since the 80s into the 90s to have particularly Industrial Relations Act, the
Severance Benefit
Act, you know, workmen compensation and those things. We battled to have those things brought to the table for amendment. And they were brought to the table, but very slowly. And then we felt some level of, we saw a little light when the partnership came into office, when Errol McLeod became Minister of Labour. And we felt at that time, because we sat down prior to the election of the partnership, and we worked out a workers' agenda. And paramount importance in that workers' agenda was the amendment to the IRA, the amendment to the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act, and also the amendment to the Companies Act that will also run in correlated to the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act in terms of where workers sit, in terms of the priority listing for compensation when a company closes down.
Yes.
And since 2010, there was active work done for the amendment of this legislation. We are in 2021, Stephen, and the Minister of Labour is still telling us things are going to cabinet. You know, I just can't believe that and he wants us to sit in intact on that kind of approach. And to us, it's really preposterous. You know, it is really a slap in the face of labor. And we are seeing pushback with respect to the amendments to those laws, because they don't believe some of the amendments that have been proposed by the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, which is a creature of the Industrial Relations Act, points to certain things that I don't believe some people in the business class and even the government would want to see happen. So they are going to delay this thing deliberately. And what happened in the intervening period? Look at what happened with Mittal. The same issue we're raising, that Mittal filed for bankruptcy, left workers hanging in limbo. They didn't pay any retrenchment benefits, any severance benefit, and workers have been hung up since then. You know, because they filed for bankruptcy and the issue of paying the workers are way down in terms of the pecking order. And those are the kind of things that we frown upon, and we believe there should be an immediate push to have the IRA. I can't understand what else cabinet would want to have after this thing has gone through so much iterations of amendments.
Yes. Okay.
It is amazing.
Now, Mr. Remy, we also we talked about being in this new environment as well, and I know traditionally at this time had there not been that cover of a state of emergency or even a pandemic, labor would have been on the streets. Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct, Stephen. And since Labor Day, we have been pushed in a corner because the curfew came and stymied us, and then the state of emergency, and now it has been extended.
And I wanted to extend that statement by saying that if Labor believes, you may have said it, you may have responded there, but a short while ago, but I wanted just present the statement again. Is it that Labor believes that there was some kind of conspiracy because I've heard it from the ground, to kind of muzzle that speaking out when you have this extension of a state of emergency? Now, we do understand that the government and the medical professionals are concerned. I suppose everyone is concerned about containing the virus and keeping the virus at bay. But at the same time, Labor is saying, I'm hearing Labor is saying that we could have probably gone about it in a different way and not have it appear as though there is a muzzling of the trade union movement.
And Stephen, that's our views. We have expressed that, and we expressed it since Labor Day. We said that they used they could not have used it in the state of emergency in such a forceful way. But for Labor Day, remember, they extended the curfew hours to the day, 10 o'clock Labor Day, which was the time that the labor movement had planned to be on the streets in a very organized manner, following all the COVID-19 regulations and restrictions. And that curfew came and stunted that. When the labor movement declared that they're going to have September 1 as Freedom Day, that was way before the state of emergency extension was contemplated. And just last week or week before, the Prime Minister made the announcement that the state of emergency is going to be extended by another 3 months. On the eve of the labor movement, just after the labor movement announced September 1 as Freedom Day. So we are convinced that those are efforts to stymie the resistance effort. And what we say in resistance, not from an antagonistic perspective, Our resistance is about the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago. And we believe when you put a state of emergency in place, you restrict civil liberties, you deny the opportunities for persons to raise issues of checks and balances to the abuse of power. That is very much possible in a circumstance like those. Those are the things that the labor movement frown upon on, and those are the things we believe are being abused right now in this particular circumstance because the government have abrogated on themselves unfettered powers to do certain things that we are frightened for. We have a budget coming up. What can happen? We can't protest against it.
That's another topic. I know. We will have to deal with Mr. Remy a little later on. And again, I'd want to, to bring labor back in when we get to that point. Dealing with in our fiscal measures. But let me just welcome Mr. Trevor Johnson, Secretary General of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, to join the discussion at this time. Mr. Johnson, good evening to you and welcome.
Good evening to you, Mr. Cummings, and good evening to my comrade, Remy. Pleasure to be on with both of you.
Thank you for joining us. I know you indicated to us a little earlier on that you had a commitment, and we all, we're happy that you are able to join us at this time. Well, Mr. Johnson, we are talking about the topic, a response from labor in a pandemic, and the discussion is somewhat wide-ranging. We don't want to sort of pin down on any one particular area, and we thought it would have been a good idea to continue as well that discussion that we had some weeks or some months ago on this very same business of labor and in a pandemic. And as I have you, as you've just joined us, Mr. Johnson, we were talking a little earlier on about what has been happening in the labor market in Trinidad and Tobago. We went into some statistics. I saw a report from the central bank which indicated that there has been a decrease in terms of labor participation. And I know that labor continues to be very much concern about what is happening in the market, because that's what you do. You fight for the rights and protection of workers. What are you getting as a sense, Mr. Johnson, quite apart from what Mr. Remy have said, what are you getting as to what's been happening in Trinidad and Tobago in the labor market? Is it that we are at crisis, critical levels, at the point where something may have to give some way or the other?
Well, yeah, so thanks again, Mr. Cummings. And let me just begin by saying I would have heard the last input by my comrade, Joseph Remy, and I just want to indicate that I fully agree and endorse all that he has said with regard to the concerns with labor being able to manifest itself in a very practical way. And as just to come to what you were asking, clearly, I mean, one doesn't have to be an economist or a trade unionist to just walk around or drive around Trinidad and Tobago and to recognize that there's a lot of pain and suffering.
That there's a new normal. I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of pain and suffering. I was just in Tobago over the weekend for an event, and as you walk around, in the malls, I mean, places are closed. Even though things have opened up, there are several organized stores or what have you, businesses that simply have not been able to, organize or mobilize the resources because they have been closed now for 3-4 months. But this is on top of prior closure last year. And some businesses, when you close down, you have the bank, you have bills, you still have to pay rent. Yes. And what we are seeing as you go through, whether it's the mall on the streets in Tonopuna, the streets in Port of Spain, San Fernando, Chaguanas, Scarborough, where have you, there are several businesses that simply have not recovered or been able to mobilize the resources in order to reopen. So that when the government says, well, yes, you can now reopen from next week or last week, if you look around, there are several businesses, some economists have argued, may not be able to recover from this. And the consequence of this is that, remember, on one side is business, but on the other side is labor and employment. Yeah. So it means if those businesses do not reopen, that it means that there are workers who will not be able to resume employment, or even if they resume, they're resuming at probably salary cuts, or even some places that may have employed maybe say 50 persons will start back, but with only 20 or 30 persons. Yes. So we are in a lot of pain. We are seeing issues of people not able to pay, being able to pay their rent, and they are of course facing challenges with their landlord. Some people have even been evicted because the landlord has his or her bills to pay as well. Yes. Yeah. So that they're quite, you can just walk around and see. Then on top of that, we are seeing issues of current retrenchment. If we just name Caribbean Airlines for one, loss of, I think, 30-40% of the staff in one go. You've seen several other areas where you are hearing.
Yes.
Yeah, so that so on top of wider not having a job, one, or two, having lost your job, being retrenched, being laid off, not being able to pay your rent, not being able to meet your bills, and on top of that, we have school opening in a few days, and because of the uncertainty, even with whether children will go out to school, whether they'll school from home. So even people who sell uniforms, I've been hearing, well, people are not buying because they don't know if their children will be out to school. So these are just some immediate things that come to mind. Practical issues you see in.
Yeah, all right. Well, Mr. Johnson, what we want to do is we have to take a short break at the moment, and we will continue the discussion in a short while. And we are discussing this evening a response from labor in a pandemic. I have with me Mr. Trevor Johnson of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Secretary General. I have also Mr. Joseph Remy, of the Federation of Independent Trade Unions. And of course, these two gentlemen are experts in matters of industrial relations, and just to give us a sense as to what's happening in Trinidad and Tobago, the labor market, employment, and how has the labor unions been responding to this current scenario. Gentlemen, we take a short break and come right back.
Every Wednesday, join our 1-hour current affairs program, the Citizens Community Forum. Topics are wide-ranging and echoes opinions and voices of our society. Whether it be leadership, governance, health, crime, politics, or social issues, we can all have a civil and constructive discussion inside the Citizens Community Forum every Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. on Isaac 98.1 FM with Stephen Cummings.
Last week when I heard that there were 16 children sleeping in the cell in a police station, that was something that was unacceptable to me.
The current constitution of the Public Services Association, there have been concerns about how
but
the constitution...
If you are restructuring the PSA, the only way you can restructure the PSA itself is through constitutional reform.
If the minister does not accede our request and revalidate his license, we'll have to be heading to court.
Every Wednesday, 8 to 9 p.m., the Citizens Community Forum. Your host, Stephen Cummings.
Prime Minister, good evening to you and welcome to the Citizens Community Forum.
Good evening, my brother, and all your viewers, listeners. I'm happy to be here with you.
Our complaints have been more solid, and it's been more substance coming forward now. Mr. Cummings, I think Trinidad can be proud of their civilian oversight work.
Mr. Cummings, you were asking about our operational, you were asking about it from an operational standpoint. And I think where we stand out and where we stand apart from other investigative bodies is that we rely mostly on science.
But first of all, good evening, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me on your program, and a very good evening to all of your listeners. It's good to be with you once again.
And welcome back to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, and I have with me this evening Mr. Joseph Remy and also Mr. Trevor Johnson, both on the Citizens Community Forum this evening. We are discussing our response from labor in a pandemic. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thanks much, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yes, we are continuing the discussion, and I wanted to start out the second half hour by looking at our independence. We have we are now observing 59 years as an independent nation, and I'm wondering, I'm trying to get a sense from you, Mr. Remy. I could probably start with you on this question. What significance do you see when we talk about an independent nation, and I want to sort of have that nexus as well with the labor movement. Now we know of the origin, going back in the 1937 and the Butler era. Do you get a sense that we have really achieved what we may have probably been probably set out to do from a labor perspective? What has been your sense as to when we look at the achievement of labor throughout the many decades?
Stephen, it's really a time of reflection, and if you go back to 1937 into 1962, and we are now 51 years as an independent nation, I am concerned about the state of development that we have attained. particularly where in terms of the labor relations aspect is concerned. Our laws are still tied to the colonial era.
And that's
You
what I
know,
was getting at. Yes, I think you
we are still
that's what I'm
locked
getting,
into that colonial mentality in terms of how we craft our laws and those things. Our labor legislation has been designed to keep trade unions off the streets. If you look at the origin of the Industrial Relations Act, it was the Industrial Stabilization Act.
Yes.
And it was developed to suppress when you had the Joe Youngs and the Clive Nunes and them very, very vibrant, very forceful in terms of pushing the button in a different direction. They weren't just about collective bargaining. They were about adjusting the social injustices that were taking place in the society and bringing about true equality and equity and the social justice that was needed. And they had to put something to stymie the trade union movement. So the ISA came about, which was amended and turned into the Industrial Relations Act. So the origin of those acts was to stymie and suppress trade unions' agitation. And it still exists now, you know, and some of the other laws are also rooted in those colonial mentality. So it's about clamping down the trade union movement, especially the progressive trade union movement.
But Mr. Remy, we're talking about decades and decades of, you know, going back to 1937 has been a very, very long time. And I think one of the criticisms that might, you know, come the way of the trade union movement is that, you know, maybe more should have been done on the part of labor movement to ensure that we don't have those archaic laws that we speak about today in 2021 as it relates to labor.
Labor could only operate within the confines and the parameters that have been set by the legislation. And we have to be mindful of that. When you had, look at the type of trade unionists who came out. You had George Weeks, you know, you had Joe Young, you had, I call Clive Nunes, very forceful and strong person.
Candle Dagger, yes.
Candle Dagger, but you see,
the
political system that we operate in is still about a king and a queen, you know. It's still about that. You know, our education system is still structured along those lines. When you still talk about prestige schools, you know, in an independent nation, you know, prestige belongs to an area of colonialism where there is a privileged class and there's a other class and those things. So we are moving away as an independent country, but we are still holding on to the vestiges of colonialism because it satisfies the whims and fancies of those who are in power, because it allows them to continue with unfettered rights to rule like how the king and queen used to rule. If you look at what happens, the prime minister in an independent nation, you hear a minister is saying, with the permission of the prime minister, with the permission of the prime minister. Those are things that tells you how far independent we are as a country. And we are not only independent, we are republic. You know, what does it say about republicanism?
Okay, Mr. Remy, I'll come back to you in a short while. Let me bring Mr. Johnson here. We're talking about the progress and what has been, you know, what labor has been able to achieve, Mr. Johnson, going back from the Butler time, 1937 and 1930s. We know of several major events that have taken place over the decades, the water riots, and we can name quite a few. You know, in your view, what do you believe would have been some of the you know, some of those markers in the history of the labor movement? And I did reference, you know, us still having to be talking about modernizing you know, labor laws in 2021.
Thanks again, Stephen. I would say somewhat like Comrade Remy, certainly from the days of Butler up to the time of, for example, we could reference like George Weeks, as he said, Clyde Nunes, etc. Labor, we would have certainly seen some very radical shifts, seismic shifts that would have taken place between 1937 and say the 60s, maybe into the early 70s. What we have seen subsequent to that is really the imposition of what one might call a neoliberal agenda, and you have had the institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, etc., beginning to impose and I would say intrude and trespass into our societal structure in a way that totally, in many ways, decimated, our progress from that time. When you could think from the 70s, when the World Bank and the IMF would have come in, and they basically they sort of usurp the sovereignty of governments, telling you what to do, where you need to shut down, where you need to retrench persons, etc. And it's from that time we'd have seen that assault, if we can put it like that, on labor legislation, which effectively stalled. That is what has happened to labor legislation in Trinidad. Comrade Remy, has been in it for a while longer than
yes,
me,
indeed,
and he can tell you.
You use the word assault, Mr. Johnson, and I know that is a very diplomatic, way of putting it across. I have heard where the labor movement is saying that it has actually been an attack on the labor movement.
Yeah, well,
a violent attack.
It definitely is, because what I was about to say is that we have gone to, a former president of mine, and I want to be careful how I say that, because he was responding to someone who was saying, why is the labor movement not more aggressive, not more? And he was saying to them, we are not Al-Qaeda. We can't just run into the, to the Ministry of Labor or to Parliament with an AK-47 and say, pass these labor laws, because it seems as if that's what but we can't do that. The labor movement in this country has always been very responsible, but enough is enough. We have gone to consultation after consultation. Comrade Remy could tell you how many, stacks of recommendations there have been. And every time a government, so we had the People's Partnership, they had consultation, all those things were shelved. Before that, there would have been consultation. When the Minister of Labor under this Keith Rowley administration came in, we attended about, 10, 15 consultations, all with the promise that all these pieces of labor legislation would be taken to Parliament, etc. Not a single one came to Parliament. And then election came, and it was okay, we will see what happens.
Yes,
the current labor,
Mr. Remy did refer to that as well.
Yeah. The current labor minister would have indicated that here's what I'm going to see if I can liaise with the cabinet and the attorney general to see if we can get two pieces of labor legislation or something like that per year to come before Parliament. So the government has been in office a year now, because I think elections was on August the 10th. And not a single piece in its first year of office, not a single piece of labor legislation has come to Parliament. What does that signal to the labor movement? What does it signal to the average worker? If you are a parent and your child is dependent on you and you give them nothing for a year, how do you think that child will feel? Do you think they will trust you? Do you think that they will have confidence in you, that you will keep your word? You know what the answer is. So, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Remy, is it a case of the carrot and the stick? Okay, I've heard it said that, there was this promise to give, the OWTU, for example, Petrotrin, and then, things didn't go the way that some people would have wanted to. And then, is it a case of a carrot and the stick, ever so often when administrations change? I'm not just talking about, I'm looking at over what has happened, because it has not been the first time that Labour have been engaged at that level, at that political level.
And Stephen, maybe you can call it that, but it is a case of taking the labor movement for granted. In the context that, and I go back to the Minister of Finance's statement, we raised the prices of fuel twice and they have not rioted.
No one rioted, yes.
So it says to them that because we are trying to bring about a different kind of meaningful relationship between the key players in the society, that they take things for granted. So that is why the minister and them is still in shock. They are still in shock about the withdrawal from NTAC, because they believe that we would have sat there and allowed them to run roughshod over us in other areas while we sit in NTAC to say that we are in a national tripartite advisory forum. Come on, we are mature enough and we have gone beyond that. And what we are trying to do, we are trying to move the industrial relations environment because of the ease of doing business and because we would want to see sustained and sustainable employment in the country. We would like to see business opportunities being created in a harmonious industrial relations environment. Harmonious does not mean that we agree on everything, but harmonious means it is not confrontational. But
And
it
you
appears
can
that
agree to disagree, yes.
that's right, but it appears it's not more the employers, you know. And when I say the employers, the businesses, I believe that most of the confrontation has been perpetuated by governments as the major employer. If you look at what is happening to the public service and where state enterprises exist, most of the confrontational industrial relations environment occurs with the government and state enterprises. And you find on a lot of occasions, the private sector and the trade unions come about with resolutions to the industrial relations issues, and they resolve their collective bargaining processes. Most of the outstanding, if not all of the outstanding wage negotiation resides in the government, the state sector. And that is a hallmark of the arrogance that government displays towards trade unions, because we believe that they are the ones in power and they are the ones that have the unfettered rights to do what they want. And that is a fundamental shift that has to be made. And that's why I say we have 59 years as an independent nation, but we still have vestiges of colonial rule, because I am the king.
All right.
I'm the king or the queen. You know, that's how we are.
Mr. Johnson, I'm just coming back to you. You know, looking at some of the positives as well, do you believe that the pandemic has created a better platform, a better environment for you know, that unification, that fortification, you know, of labor, you know, in the sense where you are now able to probably see things on another level, looking at some of the, as I said, some of the positives? Do you believe that the pandemic has also created that platform as well?
If you mean Stephen, for labor,
not now.
Yeah, if you mean for labor, as the trade union federation, certainly, yes, it has enabled us to come together on common ground in order to deal with issues, whether it be with the government, with the employer sector, etc. But if you mean the pandemic creating an opportunity, as Comrade Remy would have indicated, for sort of engagement with the government or the state, that certainly has not happened, and it's not because of the lack of effort on the part of the labor movement. We have certainly sought to engage the employers, federations, and if it is government wants to get on board, I think we are prepared to engage with them as well, but not from the angle of, say, a top down, where they seek to want to talk down to the labor movement. We are not in that mode at this moment. We have made our position clear with our departure from NTAC. We are prepared to engage the government, but it has to be on a level playing field. It has to be on a level platform.
Okay.
And if the government wants to come and, whether from the Prime Minister down, to just talk down to the labor movement, that is not going to work. We can work together in this pandemic because it's serious. The labor movement is a responsible body, but it has to be on the basis of equitable input from all the social partners, not one sort of talking down to the other.
All right, and you're listening to and viewing the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings, discussing the issue this evening. I have with me Mr. Joseph Remy of the Federation of Independent Trade Unions, as well as Mr. Trevor Johnson of the Banking, Insurance and General Workers Union, Secretary General. Gentlemen, we have just a few minutes again before we close the program, and I want to dedicate the last few minutes. Maybe you can take a minute each, just to give us some closing remarks in terms of where you believe labor should be going now. Of course, we talked about us being in a pandemic, and some of the traditional things that labor would have been able to do, you know, is not able to do at this time. But of course, I suppose you may have different strategies. I always hear that you know, there's that you know, that comment where you know, a surprise, you know, a surprise is around the corner, or you know, you have to wait and see what may happen. But in terms of going forward, and in the closing remarks, Mr. Remy, what would you like to see? Where you think Labour should be going at this moment?
Your word forward is very apt, but forward has to have a particular context. And forward has to be contextualized against the background of a strong citizen education drive. And I say citizen, not just worker, because we just don't talk for the average working class person, we talk for the persons who are voiceless. So we have to engage in a very strong citizen education program.
Yes.
Education and edification. Go outside there, and I say go outside back to the communities and talk to the citizens. Let them know that the only alternative to bring about that check and balance in a democratic society is a progressive trade union movement who understands the right and who are fearless in their articulation. Because what happens is that because some people are concerned about the vestiges of power and the trappings of powers that they align with government, they are fearful of engaging in strong action against the government. It's not, I keep saying, our move is not anti-government or anti-opposition. We are pro-Trinidad and Tobago. And that is the fundamental difference that we must make. Whatever we do is for the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago. And in any democracy, you must have some strong check and balance mechanism. Civil society is where that lies. And the labor movement is supposed to be the leaders in a civil society trust to bring about a more equitable and just society in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly as we go into 60 years as an independent country. Remember, 60 years is the year of retirement. I hope we don't retire as an independent country. We have to be very cautious about that.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, 60 seconds, your closing remarks.
Yes, certainly. I would like to say that I think the labor movement, especially at this time where we are facing a global pandemic and an economic crisis, the labor movement is well poised if the government would allow a practical tripartite process, and if the business sector will also come on board. I believe there's potential for strong social partnership at this time, but it has to be with genuine input and intake from all of the social partners. We, as would have been said by my colleague, we are not anti-government or anti-Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, the labor movement is on record many times of basically leading the fight for social justice in so many different ways, even against crime, even against violence against women. So many different things we're not just dealing with salary increases and so on. The labor movement has come out on many times in support of our culture, our social development. Just in every area we have played a part, and we are prepared to continue playing a part in our education system. We are prepared to continue playing a part, so that our position is clear. We want to contribute, but we want to do so on the basis of equitable input. And yeah, I said labor wants to play its part in all of the areas: cultural, social, the education system of Trinidad and Tobago. As was said earlier, we need to have a more relevant education system. We want to play our part in the fight for social justice, in contributing, just as we did with the Labour Economic Alternative Plan, where we presented the government with an economic alternative. And we will continue to do so because Labour has its part to play, and we are prepared to continue playing that role.
All right. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Remy, thank you both for joining us again on the Citizens Community Forum. And from us, we want to say happy independence to you both as well, and by extension, your membership.
Same to you, Stephen, and same to your viewers, the listeners, and to Trinidad and Tobago, happy independence. And let us really push forward to make here a truly independent nation, that it has meaning of what independence is supposed to be about.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Stephen, and happy independence to all.
Yes,
all the best, Trevor.
Mr. Joseph Remy there, and Mr. Trevor Johnson, Mr. Remy being from representing the Federation of Independent Trade Unions, and Mr. Trevor Johnson representing the Banking and Insurance General Workers Union, Secretary General there. And of course, we are always happy to have persons expressing different points of view and different perspectives, and you know, from representing different sectors in Trinidad and Tobago. And we certainly welcome, you know, the thoughts and, as I said, the different perspectives and views, opinions from leaders within our national community. So that's it at the moment, and we would want to thank you, our listeners and viewers, again to the Citizens Community Forum. I'm Stephen Cummings. See you next Wednesday. It was a famous poet who once said, "They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Words there from famous poet Martin Niemöller, 1892 to 1984.